Is it possible to beat the entire story of Grounded along with all of its bosses on the hardest difficulty with nothing but your fists? That is the question I have asked myself before making this video, and today I'm happy to show you the results. Before we begin, if you guys aren't subscribed, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a ton and it helps me make more videos just like this. We start our run by picking the best teen in the game, which is Hoops, and we set our difficulty to WOAH mode. It essentially makes all the creatures in the game have increased HP and damage. I wake up inside of a suitcase being shrunken down to the size of an ant. With no memory how I got here, I begin to collect some resources needed to survive, and I stumble upon a field station. Inside, it holds a resource analyzer which allows me to scan up to 3 items, unlocking the crafting recipe with those items involved. With this being completed, I'm now able to craft a pebble axe, which is used to chop down grass blades, clovers, and much more. This is also a great time to mention the rules of this video. I'm strictly only able to deal damage with my fists, and if I don't, the run is over. But I'm going to allow myself to use tools such as axes and hammers to help me with progression. Without it, the run would be pretty much over already. So with this in mind, I use my newly crafted axe to chop down some clovers and collect their leaves, while also going around and punching all the locals to collect their meat. But don't worry, this step is important. I begin to collect some acorn shells over at an oak tree and discover another field station. Inside, I analyze the meat, acorn shells, and the clover leaves I collected, allowing me to craft the acorn shovel and to unlock recipes for the weevil shield and the clover armor. But before I craft the shield, I first need to use my shovel to dig up some grubs and beat them to a pulp to collect their hide. With this, I'm now able to craft the shield and some clover armor. With this shield in my hands, I can now freely defend myself as it allows me to block attacks, but this also reduces the damage I deal by 20%. With my fists already dealing such little damage, this is just the cherry on top. I begin to fist my way through all the lawn mites inside the backyard as they are one of the weakest creatures in the game, and I needed to collect the little fist mutation. For those who have no idea what mutations are, they are basically obtained by either killing creatures, discovering locations, or doing other certain feats. Once you obtain a mutation, you can then activate it, which can provide helpful stats to the player. Just like this one here called Parry Master. With this mutation activated, it gives me stamina back on a perfect block, which is super useful while fighting enemies as I'm always out of stamina, and without stamina, I can't fist my enemies. After taking out majority of the lawn mites, I still didn't have the mutation I was after, so I begin to collect some other items that would increase my damage. Starting off with the power droplet trinket. This is found in the upper yard, which is a place where you shouldn't be in the first hour of the game. Trinkets are just like mutations as they provide additional stats to the player, but this time you can only have one trinket activated at once. Although I picked up the power droplet, it won't be very useful until later in the game. For now though, I collected the Thor's pendant trinket, which can be found on a hidden stump in the upper yard. This trinket alone is one of the best in the entire game as it gives you a bonus to basically all your stats. But even with all these increased stats, I'm still very weak. The next morning, I begin punching more lawn mites and finally got the little fist mutation. The reason why this mutation is so important is it allows my damage to stack up to 100 times when I punch with my fists until I get hit. So to fully max out on my damage, I need to punch a creature over 100 times without being hit. With this mutation now equipped, I was starting to feel strong, so I crafted myself an eye patch, which increases my damage by a further 10%, but increases the damage I take by 25%, basically making me a glass cannon. It was now time to progress the story, so I follow some cables into a cave and take out some of the lawn mites that are chewing on wires. After this, I find a machine and turn it on. Some lasers shoot out onto me, but something goes wrong, causing an explosion in the distance. Before investigating the explosion, I make my way inside of an anthill and find a memory chip. Having no idea what this does, I put it in my pocket and I leave the anthill. I make my way towards the explosion and this leads me into the oak lab, and inside I find a robot on the ground. I help them up and they introduce themselves as Burgle. He was created by Tully, who also created the shrinking machine. The only way to grow big again is to collect the ingredients for the embiggening cocktail. Unfortunately, Tully has been missing for some time and the explosion has corrupted Burgle's memory bank. Thankfully, he explains there are super chips scattered around the labs which contain all of his memories. I place my hand onto a scanner which now grants me access to all the labs around the yard. And the first super chip is located in the Hedge, but before I go, I give Burgle the chip I'd found inside the anthill, and on it had some valuable crafting recipes, which I used raw science to pay for, and pretty much raw science is this game's equivalent of currency. Back in the yard, I punched bombardier beetles in search of their boiling glands, as I needed this to upgrade my hammer. In the Hedge, I break open some spider web sacks, and they have tier 2 resources inside, and I needed stink bug parts. In Grounded, there are 4 tiers of tools, starting off with tier 1, which is used for the early game, tier 2 for the mid game, tier 3 for the end game, and then there is tier 4, but that's for New Game Plus. While in the Hedge, I also chopped up some berries and gathered all their chunks. During the night, I was flashbanged by a light, attracting tons of gnats. I fist my way through all of them to collect their fuzz. With this, I was now able to craft a gas mask, protecting myself from stink bugs, and I turned all the berry chunks into berry leather. Although I was still missing some stink bug parts for the upgraded hammer, so I put on my gas mask and begin to fist the locals once more for their parts. With enough of their parts, I combine all the ingredients and craft the tier 2 hammer. With this hammer in my hands, it now allows me to collect milk molars, which are scattered throughout the yard. There are 2 types of molars in the yard. We have the white and the gold molars. The white molars are used to increase your HP, stamina, hunger and thirst rate, healing percentage, and finally max mutations, and the gold molars are used to increase your stack size. I collected a ton of molars on my way towards the Hedge lab, and inside I found a storage room filled with goodies. I then took a zipline down into the lab and found a piece of a password. Exploring further, I found more password pieces, and the entire lab was overrun by spiders. Thankfully though, there were robots inside taking them all out. Inside the main room, I placed my hand on a scanner and slapped my hands on the keyboard. The compartment with the super chip needed a password, so it was lucky I collected them prior. I input the passwords into the computer, unlocking the door, and I found my first super chip and a duper disc. With this duper disc in my hands, it now allows me to duplicate items by using raw science, which is quite handy. Before leaving the Hedge lab, I scaled high and found a recipe note to summon the Hedge Broodmother boss, but I won't be doing this anytime soon as I was not ready for it. Outside of the Hedge, I attempted to sneak past a wolf spider inside of a cave to collect another molar. I thought I got away safely, but the clapping of my cheeks must have alerted it. Even though this wolf spider has a ton of HP, over time my damage began to scale and I took it out with ease. I then infused myself with all of the molars I had collected into basically everything, making me even stronger. I then did a staring contest with a wolf spider, which I obviously won, and ran over to the pond and collected eelgrass strands along with lily pad wax. With these ingredients, I'm able to craft a gill tube, increasing my oxygen capacity as the next super chip is somewhere in the pond. Deeper in the pond, I used my shovel and dug up a ton of koi scales, as this would be used for my next armor upgrade. I followed some underwater lights and made my way inside the pond lab, but the main door was locked and I needed to activate 3 breakers. Can someone please tell me how I'm able to go ahead and flip these breaker switches at the size I currently am? Like, this just makes no sense. This game is extremely unrealistic. With these switches now activated, I was now able to enter the pond lab, and inside there were more robots just like the ones in the Hedge lab. So I avoided them and found the second super chip and the duper disc. Back on land, I crafted the entire koi armor set, which has the perk that would increase my perfect blocking window. This also has a set bonus that allows me to decrease a creature's defense by 20% if I perform a perfect block. I then upgraded the armor a couple of levels, increasing its defense and durability. Throughout the yard, you can find upgrade rocks, and these can be used to either upgrade your weapons and your armor. Marble upgrade rocks are used to upgrade your armor, and the quartzite rocks are used to upgrade your weapons, but sadly I can't use quartzite to upgrade my fists. The next super chip is located at the Haze lab, and the entire area is filled with a weed killer gas, so I need to wear a gas mask to traverse safely. I find the Haze lab, but the main door is busted and I need an explosive to blast it open. Thankfully, the Haze is home to infected variants of some creatures in the yard, which have explosive capabilities. So I lure over an infected larva and force it to explode, granting me access inside the lab. Down here is the first major hurdle of the run, as it's time to fight our first boss, the infected ladybug. Usually this boss is a cakewalk on any difficulty besides WOAH mode, as if WOAH mode is enabled, she has more creatures in the arena. And these creatures include infected mites and the infected larva. Oh, and not to mention, the infected ladybug also likes to shoot out explosive bombs. There were so many creatures in the fight that I needed to focus on, and it was super difficult to stack my little fist as I kept on getting hit. This fight alone took multiple attempts and over an hour to complete, and I wanted to give up here. But thankfully I took them all out, and I was super lucky lucky to do it before my shield broke. I also got the Truffle Tussle mutation after taking out the boss, which basically gives my fists the power to cause explosions. I then collected the third super chip and the final duper disc along with some bombs. With these items in my inventory, I do some parkour on grass blades and enter the sandbox. Here there was another anthill, so I make my way inside. Down here was the last known super chip location, the Black Ant Lab. The entrance was blocked by a rock, so I used an explosive from the Haze lab to blast it open. While using the scanner, I was interrupted by a robot, which really didn't end very well for him. Once inside, I mashed my hands on the keyboard to grant access to Sector A of the lab. Exploring further, I found another computer which granted me access to Sector B. In the deepest part of the lab, I stumble into a room with another computer. I slap my hands on it, not knowing this would deploy the Assistant Manager Squad. This was the next major boss, but was no way as near as difficult as the infected ladybug. Even though the manager summoned other robots and lasers trying to stop me, they stood no chance, as once I was fully stacked, my damage was just chunking their HP. Once I defeated the Assistant Manager, I collected his keycard and got the Shocking Dismissal mutation, which when activated, it has a chance for my fists to deal a shock attack. And then I found the last super chip. Before I returned the chips back to Burgle, I took out some bees for their stingers and made my way over to a tipped over barbecue and harvested a chunk of its coal. I then went back to Burgle and gave him all the super chips that we had collected, and he was able to find the last known location of Tully's Scabby. For those who don't know, the Scabby is what shows our vitals on the bottom of the screen. We are now only missing a single ingredient needed for the embiggening cocktail, so Burgle hands me a replacement Scabby fuse and I begin my search for his Scabby. Back at base, I built an oven which is used to cook boss summons, along with a zipline anchor for easy access into the upper yard. Speaking of the upper yard, it was now time to upgrade my tools to tier 3. So I begin to punch a few Black Ox beetles for their parts with some help of the ladybird larvas. I made my way over to a termite's nest and lured out one of their soldiers, where I begin to punch it to death for its chompers. With the chompers collected, I built a workbench and crafted the termite axe. With this axe in my hand, I used it to chop pupa for its chunks, as this would be needed for further upgrades. I lured an ox beetle towards a fire ant nest, which began a war. I needed to do this as I wanted to upgrade my shield to the fire ant shield, which is the best shield in the game. But I was short on some parts, so I need to come back and do this again later. For now though, I jumped down into the stump lab, and inside I found the recipe note to summon the Mantis boss. Back at base, I turned all the pupa chunks into hide and crafted the Black Ox hammer, now meaning I have the highest tier of tools in the game. I built a smoothie station and made a ton of smoothies, and these are used for healing while also providing special effects depending on which ones I craft. During the night, I went back over to the fire ant nest and watched another ox beetle take on the entire colony. Thankfully this time I had enough parts needed and crafted the fire ant shield. This shield also has the perk to increase my damage by 15% for a short amount of time. With my new upgrades, I went over to the red ant nest and took out the entire generation. While doing this, I maxed out my little fist mutation, which now gives me the mastery perk, allowing me to hit twice in a single punch, meaning I can stack faster and deal more damage. At base, I built a cookery and crafted a spider slider meal, which increases my chances to crit by 5% for 20 minutes. I also finished cooking the Broodmother BLT, so it's now time to take her down. In the arena, I drank a liquid rage smoothie, which would increase my damage by a further 10%. I then begin the fight and summon her in, and to my surprise, this fight was extremely easy as my damage was just chunking her health. Heck, even if I got hit and lost all my stacks, I was still dealing a ton of damage, and within about 40 seconds in the fight, she goes down and I collect all of her parts. After the fight, I make my way over to a wooden plank and use my termite axe to harvest a few splinters. With this, I can use the Broodmother parts and the splinters to cook up the Mantis kebab. Once it was cooked, I took my zipline back up into the upper yard and made my way over into a pot plant. Inside, I summoned the Mantis boss, and without a doubt, the Mantis is one of the hardest bosses in the game, as in WOAH mode, a single strike from one of its attacks can easily take me out. However, the Mantis did not plan on my damage to scale through the entire roof, as I parried every single attack, never losing my stacks. Once I was at 100 stacks, the rest was history, and the Mantis fell to a good fisting. I collect its parts and I make my way over to Tully's Scabby. Here I needed to use my Black Ox hammer to bust open the back and place in the fuse Burgle gave me. I turned the Scabby on and a recording message played, basically saying Tully has gone into hiding underneath the shed as the company Omnant was spying on him. time. I find the entrance to the undershed, and inside is one of the creepiest locations in the entire game. This place was filled to the brim with black ox beetles, spiders, mosquitoes, and to top things off, a black widow. Now I could avoid this widow if I just ran past it, but I don't back down from a challenge. And to no one's surprise, the widow is one of, if not the strongest creatures on WOAH mode, as the widow eats its own widowlings, gaining increased attack speed along with healing itself. Oh, and not to mention, the widow and the widowlings also deal a ton of venom damage which lingers for quite some time, making it almost impossible to stack my damage. This fight alone took nearly 40 minutes to complete, as I needed to be perfect in the fight, blocking all attacks and taking out the widowlings before she can feast on them. I then took out the widow, and the cherry on top was she only dropped a single fang, which is quite literally the worst drop possible. Just outside of the widow's den, I found the undershed lab, and inside something wasn't quite right. It's explained in audio logs down here that Tully was attempting to create a new vessel for his body as his current one was raisoning. Deeper in the lab, I hear a roar and I find the Mant, which is a combination of a human and an ant. So the only logical thing I did was to instantly fist his tighty whities. The fight was honestly a breeze, as once again, once I hit 100 stacks, I was dealing chunks of damage. The Mant even attempted to summon its own fire ants to assist it, but they went down in a couple of hits. With a final low blow, the Mant was defeated and I progressed deeper into the lab. Here I also got the Mantisterious Stranger mutation, which allows me to summon in my own Mant at a very low % chance. I found a scanner and placed my hand on it, which unlocked a seal and revealing the missing scientist, Tully. This here is the raisoning effect, which turns your body, well, pretty much into a raisin. Here is where we also find the final ingredient needed for the embiggening cocktail, grilled science. Not to be confused with raw science though. I was now in the end game and was close to growing big and going home, but there were still a few bosses I needed to fist. Starting off with the Wasp Queen. Now I can't just find the recipe note lying on the ground somewhere, no, I need to take out wasps in the yard while also taking down their small hives. After taking down 3 of these small hives, I got a prompt saying the wasp hive was disturbed. Being completely exhausted, I built a lean-to and decided to take a nap. During this, the brawny boy bin exploded open, spewing tons of wasps all over the yard. Whoopsies. But hey, the good news is I can now go inside their hive. In here, I find the shield solidifier trinket, which will become quite useful in another boss as it increases my block strength. I ran into the wasp hive, and on a skeleton, I found the recipe note to summon the Wasp Queen. Before I took her on, however, I needed to collect ingredients needed for the meal, such as a tiger mosquito beak. While over here, I find a hole inside of a castle and decide to jump down. Here, I find a mysterious lab, which Tully explains this is not his own. Inside the lab, I find a creature being controlled by some antenna and find another recipe note. This one is for the infected Broodmother boss, which is hands down the hardest boss in the entire game. Deeper in the lab, I find a big red button and decide to push it. This turns on a monitor showing Director Schmechter, who is the CEO of Omnint and was the one who shrunk us down in the first place. Here he also explains that the antennas on some of the creatures are being controlled by himself. This then begins his boss fight, which is basically a reskin of the assistant manager, which kinda sucks. But what doesn't suck, however, is how fast I took him out. Like, I couldn't even see his health bar, that's how fast he went down. And after that 3-second fight, I collected his data disc, which had the cure for raisoning. I forgot to mention this before, but there was no cure for raisoning at all until right now. Also, Schmechter is still alive, we just killed a robot with his face projected on it. I left the lab and ran back to my base where I cooked up the Wasp Queen boss recipe. Once this was completed, I ran back into the Wasp hive and summoned her in. The Wasp Queen boss fight is quite difficult if you have no idea what you're doing, as during the fight, she likes to summon in wasps to aid her fight. But this was just an easier way to stack my damage, as it was slightly difficult to fist a flying creature. Once the Wasp Queen reaches below 50% HP, she summons in wasp drones, and their entire purpose is to heal the queen. But funny enough, I was so strong that the healing did nothing at all and I took out the Wasp Queen with ease. I looted her body for her parts and I got the Bardic Inspiration mutation, which gives myself offensive and defensive buffs, but only if I use bows. With the Wasp Queen defeated, there was only one boss left to take down, but before I take it on, I needed to collect some pond moss. Usually this can be obtained with a tier 3 widow dagger, but you know, I'm not really keen to fight another one again. Thankfully, there is another way to collect the moss, but it's a rare drop from the spiny water fleas. So I attempt to fight one in the water for over 10 minutes, which goes completely nowhere as I can't throw my fists while underwater. But with my big brain and game knowledge, there is a bug where water fleas can get stuck above water in the undershed. This now allows me to deal damage to them with my fists. And this only took around 20 kills and 30 minutes of my life to collect a single piece. With the single pond moss now in my hands, I ran over to Burgle and used the super duper to duplicate the moss 14 times. Back at base, I cooked up the infected Broodmother boss item, which requires parts from all the other previous bosses. Over in the Haze, I climbed to the top of the weird killer and plugged the hole with a piece of gum. This stops the gas around the Haze and opens the infected Broodmother's arena. Inside her arena, I equipped the power droplet trinket that I collected in the beginning of this run. The cool thing about this trinket is it allows me to use any mutation with my fists. This means I can use the bardic inspiration mutation without needing a bow. I buffed myself up with liquid rage, increased my damage by 10% and summon the infected Broodmother. This boss, hands down, was a piece of cake as her attacks were slower than I expected. Once I reached 100 stacks, I easily took her out. That is until I realized she had a second phase. She then began to scream in the arena, which caused bombs to fall onto the ground. And to top things off, the explosions also heal her. But even with her second phase, she stood no match as once I was fully stacked, she goes down. With her defeat, this now means we have taken out every single boss in the game, is what I would have said if she didn't have a third phase. This phase, however, is much more difficult as her attack speed spikes through the roof. Heck, sometimes she attacks so fast you can't even parry all the attacks. Thankfully, the shield solidifier trinket helps a ton in the final phase, as when she does the super fast combo, I can hold up block and block every single attack. Soon enough, the infected Broodmother goes down. For real this time. Defeating her grants us the Spore Lord mutation, which buffs our explosive damage, which pairs nicely with our explosive fists. I then fought her 3 more times as I wanted enough parts for her entire armor set. Now don't get me wrong, these fights were difficult, but come nowhere close to the Black Widow, and I'm not even kidding. With enough of her parts collected, I make my way back to base and craft the entire set. Pond moss was also one of the main ingredients needed, which is why I collected it prior. Here I also upgrade my armor down the sleek path, giving me a bonus effect. In this game, there are 2 upgrade paths when it comes to armor. You have the bulky path, which increases your defense and durability, and you have the sleek path, which gives you a bonus effect and a small amount of defense, but not as much as the bulky path. The sleek path for the infected Broodmother armor is Dynamite, which lowers the creature's defense to explosive attacks by 20%. And the entire infected Broodmother armor is specifically tailored to explosive damage, so I'm just going to be a machine when it comes to explosive attacks. With my new upgrades, it's now time to begin the final mission of the game, which requires me to head over towards the Jar-O-Matic, which is used to brew the embiggening cocktail. Inside the Jar-O-Matic, I place an empty cell and head towards the top to place all the ingredients required for the cocktail. With everything all set, I activate the machine, but something goes wrong. Schmectors or creatures are still around and they are trying to break the mixers, which I use to power the Jar-O-Matic. I make my way down and take out all the orc fire ants while also repairing the damage they caused. I speak with Tully and he opens the storage facility, and inside are some resources that I can use to set up a defense around the mixers. I spent the next few minutes building my defenses, and once satisfied, I began the brewing process. This caused all the orc creatures nearby to attack the mixers, so I stand my ground and take them out. That is until a wave of orc fireflies came my way and I'm quickly overrun by the orcs. It's also a great time to mention that my little fist stacks are completely wiped after each wave, so I'm extremely weak at the beginning of the wave, and by the end of it, I'm slightly stronger. My new infected Broodmother armor was helping out a bunch, dealing a ton of explosive damage, but was no way near enough, so I needed a new plan. And that new plan was to activate the mysterious Stranger mutation. With this equipped, I summoned my own Mant, which can take the aggro of the orcs and deals a ton of damage. This was 100% the right call, as sometimes I would summon more than 3 Mants at once. This is a direct message to the Mant: if you are watching this video, I appreciate the help. You pretty much saved the run. After some time, the brewing process was finally complete and the embiggening cell was now filled. Before I went big, I said goodbye to my base, because without it, I wouldn't have been able to do this at all. So if my base is watching this video, thanks as well. Down in the lower yard at the mysterious machine, I replaced the cell and turned the mysterious machine on. Thankfully this time there was no explosions and I grew big, finishing the run. And there we have it. I have completed Grounded on WOAH mode using just my fists. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video as much as I did, and before I go, I wanted to give a quick shout out to my channel members and my tier 3 members. Idiot Plays, Janky, Nano, Was, Coconut, and the Stitchman. I appreciate you guys a lot. And with all that said guys, I will catch you guys in the next video.